What happens to our market equilibrium when one of our curves is going to shift? So we're tackling single shifts in this particular section. First of all, we always draw out our supply and demand curves. We have our initial demand curve, D0 right here. We have our initial supply curve, S0, equilibrium price, P0, equilibrium quantity, Q0 for the market for these energy drinks. So I can go ahead and say what happens if this particular shock occurs, and it's up to you to decide which one of these curves it's going to be affecting and to draw out in the particular correct direction, and you tell me exactly what happens to our new equilibrium. So suppose that I tell you that there is a new study that tells you that if you consume energy drinks, it's going to be beneficial for your exam scores. Which curve is going to be affected in this instance? Supply, or is it going to be demand? You should have said demand in this particular example, because what determinant are we hitting on? We're hitting on your taste and preferences. So here, consuming energy drinks is going to be good for your exam scores, so it's hitting on the consumer side, on the demand side. So we hit that very first determinant of demand, taste, and preferences. And this is going to be a positive shock to your taste and preferences, so you should be drawing out your demand curve over to the right, away from the origin. So here, with an increase in demand due to these positive shocks to your taste and preferences, you shift out your demand curve, you move from D0 to D1, and what happens to our new equilibrium? The new equilibrium is going to be the new intersection right here between our original supply curve and the new demand curve that we just drew out. So D1 right here. So D1 and S0, this is the new intersection. And what happens to our equilibrium? We notice that prices go from P0 to P1 and quantity goes from Q0 to Q1. So anytime we have an increase in demand, prices are going to increase and quantity is going to increase as well. So this is exactly the methodology that you should be giving to yourselves in order to see what happens to equilibrium when we have a shift of demand, or as we're going to see in the next few sort of slides, a shift of supply as well. So identify the correct shock and then shift out the correct curve in the correct direction. So let's go ahead and do a new example. Suppose now that I tell you that there is a new study out that says that if you consume energy drinks, it's going to induce hallucinations and paranoia. So which one of these curves is that going to affect? So just moving in the opposite direction now, it's still going to affect the demand curve, but now we have a negative shock to taste and preferences. So I'm going to assume that for the vast majority of us that we don't want hallucinations or paranoia. For some people, it might want to increase demand for people like me, but I'm just going to assume that for the vast majority of you guys, that it's going to be a negative shock to taste and preferences. So here we have a decrease in demand instead, so we shift our demand curve over to the left towards the origin, and we shift our demand curve. Our new intersection is going to be right here. So in the intersection of our new demand curve and our original supply curve, we notice that prices go down from P0 to P1 and quantity also goes down from Q0 to Q1. So anytime we have a decrease in demand, it causes equilibrium to change to a lower price and a lower quantity. So far so good. Let's go ahead and take a look at some supply shifts right now. So suppose that I tell you that the price of sugar has actually decreased. So within the sugar industry, just the cost of sugar has gone down. So if the cost of sugar goes down, how is that going to affect the supply curve for our energy drinks? Well, what is the main ingredient in energy drinks? It's sugar. So if the cost of sugar goes down, that tells us that energy drinks, that producers and firms of these energy drinks are going to increase their supply, increase the production, because sugar is a prime ingredient. It's a prime input or resource into energy drinks, so supply is going to increase. Remember, an increase in supply, we shift it away from the origin over to the right. And what happens to our new equilibrium? Here, anytime we have an increase in supply, we look for the new intersection of our new supply curve and our original demand curve. We see that prices go down, but quantity has increased. So anytime we have an increase in supply, prices go down from P0 to P1, and quantity is going to increase from Q0 to Q1. So as before, we want to go ahead and label all of these curves out right here, just to make sure that we are looking at the right intersection. Final shift that we can talk about right here is, suppose that I tell you that there is going to be a tax imposed on the sale and production of energy drinks. Remember, taxes are only going to affect the supply side of the market, and firms and corporations, they do not like taxes. So if taxes increase, supply is going to go down, supply is going to decrease. We shift our supply curve over to the left towards the origin. So here, our new intersection is going to be S1 and D0. We notice that prices increase and quantity is going to go down. So a decrease in supply causes equilibrium to change to a higher price and lower quantity. So with all of these shifts that we have right here, I can basically come up with many examples for demand determinant shifts, for supply determinant shifts. We've taken a look at a whole bunch of different shifts determinants for each on this demand side, on the supply side. So once again, it's going to be up to you to decide which one of these determinants is affecting demand, which one of these determinants is affecting supply, and to draw them out in the correct direction and find the new intersection to find our new equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And these 4 examples that we brought up right here are fairly simple for us because we only focused in on one shift at a time. We only took a look at, hey, what happens when demand shifts right here? What happens if supply shifts right here? But things are going to become a little bit more complex when we have simultaneous shifts of supply and demand. So what happens if supply increases and demand decreases? What happens if supply increases and demand increases at the same exact time? And this is the more realistic and more complex case that we need to go ahead and take a look at. And there are a few more intricate details that we're going to be seeing in the next video. But for here, as long as you can identify what happens with these single shifts, you're going to be good to go with these particular questions.